Hey, what's up? My name's Eric and welcome to the Flowbash channel. That's me. In this video, we're going to be going over how to perform the 100-hour service on your outboard. This service is something that each and every single one of you can do in your own driveway, and I'm here to show you guys how to do it. Now, the steps may be slightly different depending on what outboard you have, but for the most part, what you see in this video is going to cover 99% of all outboards out there. For most outboards, your 100-hour service obviously is self-explanatory. You're going to do it every 100 hours or once a year, whichever comes first. It's a pretty basic service. What it consists of is an oil change. You're going to want to change your gear case lubricant. You're going to want to change your water pump impeller. Also, if you have an air filter, that'll be due for a change. Change your fuel filter and change the spark plugs as well. The items that you'll need to complete your 100-hour service are engine oil, an oil filter, gear case lubricant. They also sell this special tool to pump the gear case lubricant into the lower unit, spark plugs, your water pump impeller and gaskets if required, fuel filter, some anti-seize, some marine lubricant, degreaser, and depending on your engine, the earmuffs so you can run it in your driveway. So I'm starting the service by changing the engine oil. First thing you want to do is make sure the motor is straight up and down. This is going to help all the old engine oil drain all the way out of the motor. Of course, you want to make sure you dispose of it properly by having a proper drain pan. It also helps by putting a big piece of cardboard down underneath the motor to catch any stray spills, because it's going to happen. So obviously, what you want to do is remove the drain plug and just do your best not to spill engine oil anywhere. So I'm doing my best to catch all of that old engine oil, and you can see it's kind of dripping everywhere. Now, something to note, when you remove the drain plug, see if your motor has a brass crush washer. It's not imperative that it's there, but if yours did come from the factory, you don't want to lose this. Some people replace them every single oil change. I find that's a little bit unnecessary. It usually takes quite a few oil changes for that crush washer to wear out. So while I'm waiting for the engine oil to drain, this will be a good opportunity to drain the gear case lubricant as well. So the drain for the gear case should only be hand tight. If you have to use any excessive force, stop, take a step back and see what's going on. So you'll see here, I removed the plug and the fluid is going to barely drain out. That's because the fill plug is still attached. Removing it is going to vent the system and allow the fluid to drain much more quickly. And I do it in this order because when you remove the drain, you don't want that fluid to just fly out everywhere and get all over your hands and splash all over the place. So this is a little bit more controlled process. Now, to fill up the lower unit with gear oil, they make a special tool that pumps it out of the container, and you screw the other end into the drain of your lower unit. And they come with different adapters. Now, for whatever reason, the one I got did not come with an adapter that works on my F25 Yamaha. So I had to kind of finagle something. Luckily, I had this small piece of tubing that I just jammed in there and I made something work. But typically, you should have an adapter that's going to work for your outboard. So with the vent unscrewed on the top of the gear case, you insert this into the bottom drain plug of your lower unit, and then you just start to pump until you start to see gear oil come out of the vent on the top of the gear case. Just barely, and that means you know you're done. Now, before you remove the pump from the drain of your lower unit, what you want to do is go ahead and screw back in the cap to that top vent. Plugging up that vent is going to prevent the fluid from draining out very quickly. So it only takes a few seconds to just put the plug back into place and you've barely lost any fluid. And it's important to remember when installing the drain plug, only tighten it by hand. Don't use any wrenches. You don't have to hammer this thing down. It needs to be easily serviceable. There's absolutely no reason to lock this down super tight because the plug has an O-ring on it, so it'll keep everything sealed up. So over the time it took to service your lower unit, the engine oil should be fully drained out for the most part. There may be a couple drops left, but that's okay. Now, it's important to remember that small little brass crush washer if your drain plug actually had that. Go ahead and clean everything up, wipe the engine down, and go ahead and reinstall that washer and the drain plug. As you can see from my example, I'm not locking it down, it's only hand tight. This will allow it to be easily serviceable in the future and nothing's going to leak out. Moving on to the oil filter, I like to put a bunch of rags in there because you are going to get some oil that leaks out of there. So it just keeps everything extra clean and it prevents anything from getting in the water when you splash the boat the next time. Now sometimes you do need an oil filter wrench to remove these, even though you're supposed to install them hand tight. That heat cycle of the engine from hot to cold tends to lock them on there sometimes. If you don't have an oil filter wrench, you can also punch a screwdriver through the oil filter. Just be extra careful, and then you can kind of use that as leverage to spin the oil filter off. Before you install the new oil filter, take a look at the O-ring on it and see if it has any lubricant on it. If it doesn't, just take some new engine oil with your finger and rub some around that O-ring. What that's going to do is help create a positive seal and also aid in the removal process for the next oil change. Before you spin on the new oil filter, just splash a little bit of new engine oil in there. That's going to help prime the system on the first startup. And then go ahead and wipe down the O-ring surface. Just make sure there's no debris or any old oil on there. And the same rules apply. You're only installing this hand tight. I know it looks like I'm kind of wrenching it down really hard, but my hands were slipping on the filter, so it looks a little more aggressive than it actually is. Filling up the engine with oil is pretty self-explanatory. Just be sure to reference your engine manufacturer's recommended oil fill capacity for an oil change when you're changing the oil filter as well, because the oil filter is going to hold a few extra ounces, so you'll have to account for that. When it comes to changing the fuel filter on these small outboards, you're going to typically see one of two styles. The first pictured here on my outboard is a canister style fuel filter, and the other type is an inline filter. You'll either find the inline filter outside of the engine cowling, or sometimes you'll also find it inside. Replacing the inline filter is extremely easy. You just remove the hose clamps and pull the fuel lines off of the barbed fittings on the fuel filter housing, and then just plug the new one back into place. Now on these inline filters, they will be marked with an arrow that indicates the flow of fuel from the fuel tank to the engine, or it'll say to carb. Make sure you pay attention to that and have it facing the correct orientation. To replace a canister style fuel filter, you'll first have to unscrew the canister that houses the fuel filter element. They do make special tools for this depending on the engine's manufacturer, but I find that you can just take a pair of pliers and a rag and gently unscrew it. Just take your time, use very light pressure, and then once it's broken free, you can usually unscrew the rest by hand. The fuel filter elements have a little O-ring in them that seats inside an orifice in the engine. So once you insert the new fuel filter element and screw back on the cap, it only takes a small amount of pressure to seat it in place. You do not have to push very hard. And then tighten everything back up with the pliers and the rag. Again, be sure to use very gentle pressure. You don't want to use a ton of force because the housing has O-rings on it, so you don't have to use a lot of force to get a good seal. Moving on to replacing the spark plugs, first what you want to do is a quick inspection of the spark plug wires. What we're looking for here is no white corrosion or any discoloration, no dry rotting of the wires or the boots, making sure the boots aren't separating from the wires themselves. And when you're removing the wires from the spark plugs, do your best to take a grip at the boot and pull them off of the spark plugs. Do not pull from the wires. That's just going to help prevent the spark plug wires from separating from the boots. Once you've removed the spark plugs, do a quick inspection. A few things that you want to look for is no unburnt fuel. That could indicate that the motor's running too rich. Also, oil covering the spark plugs. That could indicate some worn piston rings. You want to inspect the white porcelain on the spark plugs. If you see any metal fragments, you could have a lot of internal issues. Make sure that it's not too discolored. That could also indicate a lean condition and that the motor's running way too hot. You also want to check the porcelain for any sparkling metal fragments. That could mean pre-detonation or some other serious internal engine issues. Also take a peek at the electrode and the ground strap for metal fragments as well as discoloration. Make sure there's no scoring or that they haven't been burnt away. Before you install the spark plugs, you want to check the spark plug gap. Now if you don't have a spark plug gap tool, a quick and easy way to check and make sure that it's in spec is to compare it to the spark plug you took out of your engine, assuming that that spark plug is in good condition. Sometimes what can happen is at the store when the person is putting it up on the shelf, they accidentally drop the package and it pinches shut the spark plug gap. So it's something that you just want to double check, and of course if you drop the spark plug yourself, always double check the gap. When you're installing the spark plugs back into the engine, something extra that you can do to make the next service a little bit easier is apply a little bit of anti-seize to the thread of the spark plugs. Because of the hot and cold cycles of the engine, the expansion and contraction of the metals, it can sometimes make it difficult to remove the spark plugs, so the anti-seize is just a little bit of a precautionary measure. And when reinstalling the spark plugs, the same rules apply to these as everything else. You only have to use hand pressure. You do not have to torque them down super tight at all. The spark plugs actually come with a crush washer on them, so when you firmly snug them in place by hand, that washer will crush and create a positive seal. And when plugging the wires back in, just make sure you push firmly until you hear that audible click. Before I remove the lower unit to install the new water pump impeller, I'm going to go ahead and remove the prop. This will be a good opportunity to check the prop shaft, make sure there's no fishing line or any other debris entangled in it, and also inspect the prop bushing and make sure that's in good condition as well. Your prop is going to be retained in place by a castle nut. Castle nut means you're going to have a cotter pin, so get some needle nose pliers, straighten out the cotter pin, and you'll be able to pull it right out. Now this prop nut is usually on there really tight, so make sure you get something to protect your hands. They do make special tools to retain the prop as you remove the prop nut. Really all you need is a rag, but just be very careful. You can actually slice your hand on a prop, especially if you have one of those stainless steel ones. Or in my case, if you've hit a lot of rocks, that prop could be pretty jagged. And when you're removing everything from the prop shaft, just be sure to take note the order in which you remove all the hardware and the prop, because that washer, the bushings, the spacer, they have to go back in the order in which you remove them. Here I'm just wiping down the prop shaft. I'm making sure there's no debris, there's no fishing line wrapped on it, and it actually looks pretty good. Considering the places that I go fishing, I'm surprised I haven't run over more line. So with the prop removed, before I go ahead and lubricate the prop shaft, I'm going to go ahead and pull the lower unit and replace the water pump assembly. Just going to make it a little less cumbersome without having the prop on it. Right now I'm just loosening up the bolts to the lower unit, but before I can actually fully remove it, I'm going to have to disconnect the shifter linkage. On 99% of all of these small outboards, you will have to disconnect your shifter linkage, and it's going to be in a different spot just depending on the make and model of your engine. Always leave one bolt threaded in the lower unit assembly, so when you go to knock it loose, it doesn't just come falling and crashing down to the ground. It also helps to have a dead blow or rubber mallet on hand just in case you have to use a little extra persuasion to knock it loose. So once you remove the lower unit, get it into a position where you can easily work on it. I just clamped it with my legs, and that worked out just fine. That gave me plenty of access to the actual water pump impeller housing. Now this housing is plastic, so when you go to pry it up, don't use any tools or any screwdrivers, just do it by hand because you don't want to crack that. When you reveal the actual water pump impeller, it's very common to see that the vanes are curved towards one direction. That's because it's just following the rotation of the shaft. That doesn't actually mean that the water pump impeller is wore out. The main things you want to look for are the usual signs of wear, signs of corrosion, if the water pump impeller is very hard and not pliable, if there's any missing vanes, or if there's any pitting or chunks of rubber missing. So here's a prime example of why you should always use genuine OE manufacturers products. When I went to the store, they didn't have an original Yamaha water pump impeller, but they did have an aftermarket that said it fit. Well, as you could see from this example, it definitely does not fit. That's about as tight as throwing a hot dog down a hallway. So since my original water pump impeller is still in really good condition, I'm just going to reuse it. When you go to reinstall your water pump impeller, take note and just look at the shaft. See if your water pump impeller is actually clocked with a key. You can see right here there's a little keyway grooved into my shaft, and this little moon-shaped device, that's the key. There's actually a groove in the water pump impeller that lines up with that keyway. So when you slide the impeller down the shaft, you line it up with that key, and that's what actually connects it to the shaft and makes it rotate. Your engine may be a little different, so just take note when you remove the impeller. Mine actually fell out and I heard it fall out when it did. Luckily, I was able to find it really easily because that would have put a complete stop in this service. So go ahead and just slide your water pump impeller down the shaft. And as you can see here, I'm keeping my finger on that little key to make sure it doesn't come flying out. It should be somewhat of a tight fit. There should not be any side to side play whatsoever. It takes a little bit of force, but once you get it on there, just give it a little twist, make sure that it actually rotates with the shaft, it's not spinning freely, and you're pretty much done with the impeller replacement. And then from there, just go ahead and reassemble your water pump housing. Make sure it's clean from any debris, sand, grit, grime. If it doesn't look like it belongs there, wipe it off. I'm sure you noticed that the vanes of the water pump impeller were actually curved in a specific direction. This is just due to the way that that shaft rotates and how tight of a fit the impeller is inside the water pump housing. So when you take the old one off, actually take note of the direction that those vanes are curved in your old water pump impeller, because when you go to put the water pump housing back on, you're going to need to manipulate those vanes and actually bend them in the direction that the old water pump impeller vanes were oriented. It's not super imperative that you do that, because as soon as that impeller spins, it's just going to force the vanes in the correct direction, but it just eliminates the rare chance that one of those vanes accidentally breaks when the motor starts up for the first time if they were pointed in the wrong direction. But that is a very rare situation. I'm not trying to scare you guys. That impeller is made to be flexible. And when you're tightening down the water pump housing, remember, only go hand tight. These housings are either plastic, some of them are cast aluminum. You can easily crack them if you tighten it down too much. You also have an O-ring here that's going to do the sealing for you. So if by chance you over tighten it and don't crack the housing, you have the potential to blow out the O-ring. That's going to cause a leak. So only hand tight, don't have to go crazy. Reinstalling the lower unit is pretty straightforward. It only goes one direction, so I don't think you can get too confused and clock this thing backwards. One tip that I do have for you is once you fully press the lower unit up to the motor and it's time to insert the bolts, tighten them in very small increments. You can see here that I hand thread these into place and then I use the wrench to tighten them down. I'll tighten one bolt until it starts to get a little tight and move on to the next one on the opposite side. I'll tighten that one down until it starts to get tight and then move to the next one on the opposite side, and I'll slowly tighten them down. And what that does is it pulls the lower unit up into place evenly on all sides, so nothing's off, you don't strip any threads, nothing's cockeyed, and it fits perfectly. Here I'm adding some marine grease to the prop shaft. What this is going to do is help prevent the prop and the bushings from seizing on the shaft, so it should make your next service that much easier. I've seen some props become seized on the prop shafts and people have had to remove them with slide hammers or beat them off with rubber mallets. You definitely don't want to do that. Just take this extra quick little step, put some grease on there, and the next time you have to remove the prop, it's going to be a breeze. Now, do you remember how difficult it was to remove the castle nut that retained the prop to the prop shaft? Well, time to reinstall it with the same amount of force. Now, if you're unsure, you can always refer to your factory service manual for the proper torque specification, or if you don't have a torque wrench, it's okay. You can really tighten this thing down. There's actually a rubber bushing that compresses when you tighten down this castle nut, and that's going to give you a little bit of a buffer. But if you don't have a torque wrench like I do, use your best judgment, and because it's a castle nut, you're going to want to take a peek and just align one of the grooves in the nut with the hole in the prop shaft so you can reinsert that cotter pin. Now, it's always best practice to use a brand new cotter pin every single time. Now, if you don't have a new cotter pin and your old one hasn't been reused too many times, it is okay to reuse it, but just inspect it and make sure that the metal hasn't been weakened from bending it back and forth too many times, because you do have to bend the ends of the cotter pin with some needle nose pliers so it doesn't fall out and your castle nut is retained and doesn't accidentally back out. When you're reattaching the shifter linkage, make sure that your shifter on the motor is perfectly in neutral. It's not favoring one gear or the other. It's right there, dead smack in the middle. If the shifter is halfway engaged when you go to attach the shifter linkage, your motor is going to accidentally want to either pop out of gear when it's in gear, or when you're in neutral, it might try and pop itself into gear, and that's going to grind your gears. Don't forget to tighten down the lock nut to your shifter linkage, and then it's time to give it a quick test. Now you may have to spin the prop to get everything to line up, but once you're lined up, shifting it in and out of gear, forward, neutral, reverse, etc. should be effortless, and that's how you know you did it right. Now all the maintenance has been done for the 100-hour service, but there's still one step left to go, and I feel like it's the most important one, and that is to do a thorough cleaning and degreasing of your engine. As you saw when we were draining all the fluids, it got everywhere. It dripped all down the motor. There's really nothing you can do to avoid that, so it's up to you to do a thorough cleaning and degreasing to make sure that you do not transfer any of those oils into the body of water where you first splash the boat after performing this service. It's important. We have to protect our oceans, our waterways, our ecosystems, the marine life, both the flora and the fauna. We have to do our part and keep the water clean so that it is available for future generations to come. We cannot be selfish and skip this step. Obviously, if you own a boat and you're performing this service, the water brings you much joy, and it's important to protect our resources so that future generations can experience the same joy that the water brings us. All right, touchy-feely stuff out of the way, let's start this engine for the first time. As I've said a million times in this video, depending on the manufacturer of your motor, you may already have a connection for a garden hose to your engine and you don't need the little earmuffs. Mine actually does. I have no idea why I'm doing it this way, but I am, and it works. So if you're using the earmuffs, just make sure they are fully covering the water intake on your lower unit, and time to start her up. Now because we removed the fuel filter, we're gonna have to prime it, so grab that primer ball, give it a few squeezes till you feel like it's tight enough, and crank your motor till it starts. Since you're doing a 100-hour service, you should know what your motor sounds like when it's running well. So as soon as you start it up, make sure nothing sounds out of place. Go ahead and make sure water is free flowing out of the weep hole, and we're only gonna run the engine for a few seconds. It's okay to give it a quick rev, but nothing too crazy because we're gonna shut it off and immediately check the oil level, because now the oil's had a chance to fill up the oil filter. It's flown through the oil galleys in the power head, so we want to make sure that we added the proper amount of oil when we did the oil change. In my case, I was reading right at the bottom of the fill line. I typically like to see mine right in the middle, so I added just a quick splash, start it again, turn the motor off, recheck, and do that as many times as necessary until it's reading at the level you want it. After that, I like to run the engine for about 10 minutes and bring it all the way up to operating temperature. And while you're waiting for that, go ahead and make sure that nothing's leaking the oil filter, the engine oil drain plug, the gear casing plugs, any fuel connections you had to remove to replace the filter. Make sure there's no fuel leaks. That is very, very bad. And of course, this will be the time when you want to put the engine in gear and out of gear. Just remember that that prop is going to be spinning, so make sure you are safely away from the prop, you, any pets, any relatives. Make sure nobody's near that prop. Go ahead, put it in gear, give it a few revs, make sure it's not popping out of gear. And once you're fully satisfied, you did a good job, you don't hear any weird sounds, the motor's not popping in or out of gear, there's no grinding, there's no whining, your job is now complete. I know this was a long video, but I finally reached 100 hours on my outboard, and I wanted to share the 100-hour service with you guys because I know there's some people that are reluctant to do this type of service on their own outboards, and I wanted to be able to provide a little bit more confidence so you can get out there, do it yourself, save a couple bucks, and learn a thing or two in the process. So before we end the video, I just want to convey how much I appreciate each and every single one of you that have subscribed and have been watching my videos throughout the years. All your positive comments, feedback, and support give me the drive to keep making content for you guys, and I really do appreciate each and every single one of you. So with that said, thanks for stopping by the Flowbash channel. My name is Eric. Can't wait to see your smiling faces in the next video. Till then, remember not to get caught up in the final destination. Enjoy the journey, because that's what matters most. See you guys.